"Your insurance doesn't cover this procedure. Find another hospital," the doctor said coldly, turning his back on a dying 6-year-old girl. Her father, a Purple Heart veteran, fell to his knees begging. But what happened 8 minutes later will restore your faith in humanity and show you that some heroes wear scrubs, not uniforms. Meet Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, 34, a woman whose life reads like a testament to resilience and sacrifice. Born in East Los Angeles to immigrant parents who worked 3 jobs between them to make ends meet, Maria learned early that nothing in life comes easy. Her father, Miguel, was a construction worker who taught her that hard work and honor were the only currencies that truly mattered. Her mother, Carmen, cleaned office buildings at night and took care of elderly neighbors during the day, showing Maria that strength comes in many forms. Maria excelled in school despite the challenges at home. She was the first in her family to graduate high school, earning a partial scholarship to community college. But when 9/11 happened during her sophomore year, everything changed. She watched the towers fall on a small TV in the college cafeteria, and something inside her shifted. 2 weeks later, she walked into the Army recruitment office and enlisted. "I couldn't just sit there and do nothing," she would later tell friends. "My parents came to this country for freedom and opportunity. When that was threatened, I had to act." Maria's military service was distinguished by courage under fire and an unwavering commitment to her fellow soldiers. During her second deployment to Iraq in 2019, her convoy was ambushed by insurgents using improvised explosive devices. When the lead vehicle was hit and 2 soldiers were pinned inside, Maria didn't hesitate. Despite enemy fire, she crawled through the burning wreckage to pull out Sergeant Danny Williams and Private First Class Sarah Chen. She was dragging Chen to safety when a second IED detonated just meters away. The explosion threw Maria 15 feet, shattering her left leg and embedding shrapnel throughout her lower body. But even as she lay bleeding in the sand, her first words to the medics were, "Are my soldiers okay?" Maria's injuries were severe. Doctors at the field hospital in Baghdad fought for 12 hours to save her leg, but the damage was too extensive. When she woke up 3 days later, the first thing she saw was a letter from the families of the soldiers she'd saved, thanking her for bringing their children home. The transition to civilian life was brutal. Maria spent 8 months in rehabilitation, learning to walk again with a prosthetic leg. The physical pain was manageable. The emotional adjustment was harder. She had nightmares, depression, and the constant feeling that she should have done more, saved more, been stronger. But then came Sophie. Maria met David Chen, Sarah's older brother, at a veterans support group. David was dealing with his own demons from his deployment in Afghanistan, and they found solace in each other's understanding. Their relationship was healing for both of them, 2 broken soldiers learning to be whole again. When Sophie was born in 2018, she came with challenges. The doctors discovered a rare congenital heart defect called hypoplastic left heart syndrome. Sophie's heart was essentially half-formed, requiring multiple surgeries and constant monitoring. The medical bills were staggering. Even with veteran benefits, David couldn't handle the stress. The sight of his daughter hooked up to machines, the constant fear of losing her, the financial pressure, it all triggered his PTSD in ways that made him unreachable. He left when Sophie was 18 months old, unable to cope with the responsibility. Maria was alone again, but this time she had something worth fighting for that went beyond duty or honor. She had love in its purest form, a mother's love for her child. Maria threw herself into creating a stable life for Sophie. She took a job as a security supervisor at Meridian Tower, a downtown office complex. The work was steady, the benefits were decent, and her supervisor, Tom Bradley, was a Vietnam veteran who understood the challenges Maria faced. Maria's days started at 5 a.m. She would prepare Sophie's medications, make breakfast, and get her ready for daycare at the Children's Heart Foundation, a special facility equipped to handle children with cardiac conditions. Then she'd drive across town to work, putting in 10-hour shifts, monitoring security cameras, coordinating with building maintenance, and handling the occasional crisis. Evenings were for Sophie, homework, dinner, bedtime stories, and the careful ritual of checking Sophie's oxygen levels and administering her medications. Weekends were for doctor appointments, grocery shopping, and the precious moments when Sophie felt well enough to play at the park. Sophie was Maria's miracle. Despite her heart condition, she was bright, curious, and remarkably resilient. She called her mother Mommy Warrior and loved hearing stories about Maria's time in the Army. Sophie had never met her father, but she didn't seem to miss what she'd never known. Maria was her entire world, and that was enough. The little girl had an infectious laugh and an unshakable optimism that amazed everyone who met her. Even during her worst episodes, when her lips turned blue and she struggled to breathe, Sophie would squeeze Maria's hand and whisper, "It's okay, Mommy. I'm brave like you." City General Hospital had been Sophie's second home since birth. The pediatric cardiology team knew her case intimately. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the department chief, had performed 3 of Sophie's surgeries and often said that Sophie was one of the most remarkable patients she'd ever treated. "That little girl has the heart of a warrior," Dr. Morrison would tell her colleagues, literally and figuratively. The hospital staff had watched Sophie grow up. Nurse Jennifer Carter had been there for Sophie's first steps, taken in the cardiac recovery unit. Physical therapist Mark Johnson had helped Sophie build the strength to play with other children despite her limitations. Even the cafeteria staff knew Sophie's favorite foods and would save her special treats. Maria's veteran benefits covered most of Sophie's routine care, but complex procedures often fell into gray areas. The insurance system was a maze of pre-authorizations, coverage limitations, and bureaucratic delays that could be deadly for a child with Sophie's condition. Over the years, Maria had learned to navigate this system with the same tactical precision she'd once used in combat. She kept meticulous records, knew every insurance representative by name, and had developed relationships with patient advocates who could expedite approvals. But the system was changing. Insurance companies were getting stricter, hospitals were under pressure to reduce costs, and the compassionate flexibility that had once existed was disappearing in favor of rigid protocols and profit margins. On this particular Tuesday evening, Maria was helping Sophie with her first-grade homework when disaster struck. They were working on a math worksheet, simple addition problems that Sophie attacked with the same determination she applied to everything else in her life. "Mommy, look! I got all 10 problems right," Sophie said proudly, showing off her work. "That's my smart girl," Maria replied, pulling Sophie close for a hug. "You're going to be a mathematician someday." Sophie giggled and started to respond, but suddenly her expression changed. Her hand flew to her chest and her face contorted in pain. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Something's wrong." Maria's military training kicked in immediately. She assessed Sophie's condition with clinical precision. Rapid, shallow breathing, cyanosis around the lips, cold sweats, and the telltale signs of cardiac distress she'd learned to recognize. This wasn't like Sophie's usual episodes. This was worse. Much worse. Maria scooped Sophie into her arms, grabbed the emergency medical bag she always kept ready, and carried her daughter to the car. Sophie was getting heavier as her condition worsened, but Maria's prosthetic leg held firm. All those hours of physical therapy, all that determination to be strong for her daughter, it all came down to this moment. The drive to City General was a nightmare. Sophie's breathing became more labored with each passing minute. Maria ran red lights, honked at slow traffic, and prayed to every deity she could think of. She called ahead to the emergency room, knowing that Dr. Morrison would want to be alerted. But when she arrived, she learned that Dr. Morrison was out of town at a conference. The night shift was being led by someone new, Dr. Harrison Webb, who had just transferred from St. Catherine's private hospital across town. Maria burst through the emergency room doors with Sophie in her arms, her prosthetic leg making a distinctive clicking sound on the polished floor. The waiting room was crowded with the usual mix of emergencies. A construction worker with a nail gun injury, an elderly woman with chest pains, a teenager with a broken arm from skateboarding. "Please help," Maria called out, her voice cutting through the ambient noise. "My daughter's having cardiac distress. She has hypoplastic left heart syndrome and needs immediate attention." The triage nurse, someone Maria didn't recognize, looked up from her computer screen with barely concealed annoyance. "Ma'am, you need to check in first. Fill out these forms and take a seat. Someone will call you when it's your turn." "You don't understand," Maria said, her military composure beginning to crack. "She's cyanotic. Her oxygen saturation is dropping. She needs to be seen now." From behind the triage desk, Dr. Harrison Webb emerged. Webb was everything that was wrong with modern medicine: arrogant, profit-driven, and completely disconnected from the human cost of his decisions. At 52, he had spent the last 15 years in private practice, treating wealthy patients who paid cash for concierge-level service. He had taken the job at City General reluctantly, and only because his private practice had been struggling. The emergency room was beneath his skills, he felt, and the patients were beneath his usual standards. "What seems to be the problem here?" Webb asked, his tone suggesting that he was already inconvenienced. "Doctor, thank God," Maria said, relief flooding her voice. "This is Sophie Rodriguez. She's a regular patient here. Dr. Morrison knows her case. She has hypoplastic left heart syndrome, and she's in distress. Please, she needs immediate intervention." Webb glanced at Sophie with the clinical detachment of someone examining a medical chart rather than a frightened child. "I can see she's experiencing some respiratory difficulty. But first, let's discuss your insurance coverage. What type of plan do you have?" Maria stared at Webb in disbelief. "My insurance? Doctor, my daughter can't breathe properly. Can we please address that first?" "Mrs. Rodriguez, is it?" Webb continued, consulting his tablet. "I need to understand your coverage before we can proceed. Emergency cardiac interventions are extremely expensive, and I need to know what we're authorized to do." "I have veteran benefits through the VA, plus supplemental coverage through my employer," Maria explained, trying to keep her voice steady. "But right now, my daughter needs help. Please." Webb's expression soured. VA benefits are notoriously limited for specialized procedures, and looking at your daughter's condition, she would likely need cardiac catheterization, possible surgical intervention, perhaps even emergency transport to a specialty center. We're talking about $50,000 to $100,000 in potential costs. Nurse Jennifer Carter, who had been working at City General for 20 years, approached the desk. She recognized Sophie immediately and was horrified by what she was witnessing. "Dr. Webb," she said carefully, "Sophie Rodriguez is one of our regular patients. Dr. Morrison has been treating her since birth. Her condition is well documented, and she's had successful interventions here before. Nurse Carter, I appreciate your input, but I'm the attending physician tonight, and I make the medical decisions," Webb replied coldly. "And my decision is that this patient needs to be transferred to County General Hospital, where they have programs specifically designed for cases like this." Maria felt her world collapsing. County General was 45 minutes away in good traffic. On a Tuesday evening with rush hour congestion, it could take over an hour. Sophie might not have an hour. "Doctor, please listen to me," Maria said, her voice breaking. "I'm a combat veteran. I served 3 tours in Iraq. I lost my leg saving my fellow soldiers. I've given everything I have to this country, and now I'm asking for help for my daughter." She gently shifted Sophie in her arms, and the little girl's head lolled against her shoulder. Sophie's breathing was becoming more labored, and her skin was taking on a grayish pallor that Maria recognized as a sign of severe oxygen deprivation. "I'll pay," Maria continued, desperation creeping into her voice. "I'll work extra shifts. I'll sell my car, my apartment, whatever it takes. Just please don't let my daughter die because of paperwork." Webb's response was as cold as winter morning. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I understand your emotional attachment to your daughter, but medicine is a business. This hospital cannot absorb the cost of expensive procedures for patients who cannot pay. There are other facilities better equipped to handle charity cases." The word charity hit Maria like a physical blow. She had never asked for charity in her life. She had worked for everything she had, sacrificed for her country, and paid her taxes and insurance premiums faithfully. "Charity?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for the same medical care that any other child would receive. I'm asking you to do your job." "My job," Webb replied with growing irritation, "is to run an efficient emergency department, not to provide free medical care to everyone who walks through those doors. Your daughter needs specialized treatment that costs money that frankly you don't have." Other patients in the waiting room were beginning to stare. Some were pulling out their phones, sensing that something significant was happening. Maria was oblivious to the attention. Her entire focus was on the child in her arms and the man who held her daughter's life in his hands. Sophie stirred weakly in Maria's arms. "Mommy?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Am I going to be okay?" Maria's heart shattered. She knelt beside the nearest chair, still holding Sophie, and looked into her daughter's eyes. "Of course, baby. Mommy's going to take care of everything. You're going to be fine." But tears were streaming down Maria's face, and she wasn't sure she believed her own words. What Dr. Webb didn't know was that one of the people recording the interaction was Dr. James Mitchell, the hospital's chief of surgery. Dr. Mitchell had been visiting a patient on the 4th floor when he received a text from his daughter asking him to pick up her prescription from the hospital pharmacy. As he walked through the emergency room toward the pharmacy, he heard the commotion and stopped to see what was happening. What he saw made his blood run cold. Dr. Mitchell was not just a surgeon. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps Reserve who had served 2 deployments as a combat surgeon in Afghanistan. He had seen the worst of human suffering and had dedicated his life to healing those who served their country. More importantly, he recognized Maria Rodriguez. 2 years earlier, there had been an incident in the hospital lobby. A distraught man, recently divorced and facing bankruptcy, had come to the hospital with a gun, threatening to hurt himself and anyone who tried to stop him. The police had been called, but they were minutes away. Maria Rodriguez, working security that day, had seen the situation developing. Instead of calling for backup and waiting, she had approached the man alone. She had talked to him for 20 minutes, sharing her own story of loss and recovery, helping him understand that his pain was temporary, but his actions could be permanent. She had saved that man's life, and possibly the lives of everyone in the lobby that day. Dr. Mitchell had watched the entire incident unfold and had never forgotten the courage and compassion Maria had shown. Now, as he watched Dr. Webb dismiss this same woman's dying child because of insurance concerns, something inside Mitchell snapped. He immediately pulled out his phone and called Dr. Patricia Hayes, the hospital's CEO. Patricia was in a board meeting, but when she saw Mitchell's name on the caller ID, she answered immediately. "James, what's wrong? You sound upset." "Patricia, you need to get down to the emergency room right now. We have a situation that could destroy this hospital's reputation and, more importantly, a child who's going to die because of Harrison Webb's arrogance and greed." Dr. Patricia Hayes had been CEO of City General Hospital for 12 years. She had built the hospital's reputation on 3 core principles: excellence in medical care, compassionate treatment of all patients, regardless of their ability to pay, and unwavering support for veterans and their families. Hayes had grown up in a military family. Her father had been a Navy corpsman in Vietnam, and she had seen firsthand the challenges that veterans faced when transitioning to civilian life. When she took over as CEO, one of her first initiatives was to establish the Veterans Care Program, ensuring that no veteran or their family members would ever be denied care due to financial constraints. The program had been one of the hospital's most successful initiatives, both in terms of patient outcomes and community relations. City General was recognized nationally for its veteran services, and Hayes was personally proud of what they had accomplished. When she received Mitchell's call, she was in the middle of presenting the quarterly financial report to the board of directors. The hospital was having its most successful year ever, with both patient satisfaction and profitability at all-time highs. "Excuse me," she said to the board members. "I need to handle an emergency situation. I'll be back shortly." But as she listened to Mitchell's description of what was happening in the emergency room, she realized she wouldn't be back to the meeting at all. This was the kind of crisis that could undo years of careful reputation building, and more importantly, it went against everything she believed in. Hayes had hired Webb against her better judgment. The board had been pressuring her to bring in more revenue-focused physicians, and Webb's credentials from the private sector had been impressive. But she had always been uncomfortable with his attitude toward patients who couldn't pay. Now her worst fears were being realized. "I'm on my way," she told Mitchell. "And James, start preparing the cardiac suite. Whatever this child needs, she's going to get it." By the time Dr. Hayes reached the emergency room, the situation had deteriorated further. Sophie's condition was worsening, and Maria was becoming increasingly desperate. "Please," Maria was saying, her voice hoarse from crying. "I'll sign any paperwork you want. I'll mortgage my house. I'll do anything. Just please help my daughter." Dr. Webb was unmoved. "Mrs. Rodriguez, your emotional state is understandable, but it doesn't change the financial reality. This hospital cannot absorb unlimited costs for charity care. I've already explained that County General has programs specifically designed for your situation." "My situation?" Maria stood up, Sophie still in her arms, and faced Webb directly. "What exactly is my situation, doctor? Is it that I'm a veteran? Is it that I'm a single mother? Is it that I'm Hispanic? What specifically about my situation makes my daughter less deserving of care than other children?" Webb realized that his words had been recorded by multiple phones and that the situation was getting out of hand. I never said anything about your ethnicity or veteran status. This is purely a financial matter." "Financial," Maria repeated. "You're letting a 6-year-old girl suffer because of money. You took an oath to do no harm, and you're standing here doing nothing while my daughter dies." Other patients in the waiting room were beginning to voice their disapproval. An elderly veteran waiting for treatment of his diabetes stood up and addressed Webb directly. "Son, I don't know what kind of doctor you think you are, but in my day, doctors helped people. They didn't stand around calculating costs while children suffered." A young mother with her own sick child added, "This is disgusting. How can you call yourself a doctor?" Webb felt the hostile attention of the room and became defensive. "Ladies and gentlemen, I understand your emotional reaction, but medicine is a complex business. We cannot provide unlimited free care to everyone who requests it." That's when Dr. Hayes arrived. Dr. Patricia Hayes walked into the emergency room to find a scene that would haunt her for the rest of her life. A decorated veteran was on her knees, holding her dying child, begging for help from a doctor who was more concerned about money than medicine. The room fell silent as Hayes approached. Her presence was commanding. At 58, she had silver hair and piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. She was known throughout the hospital as someone who was compassionate but firm, someone who always put patients first. "What exactly is happening here?" she asked, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. Dr. Webb, confident that his supervisor would support his fiscal responsibility, stepped forward. "Dr. Hayes, I was just explaining to this woman that we cannot perform expensive cardiac procedures without proper insurance authorization. The potential costs could be enormous, and I've recommended transfer to a more appropriate facility." Hayes looked at Webb, then at Maria and Sophie, then back at Webb. Her expression was unreadable, but those who knew her well could see the storm building behind her eyes. "Dr. Webb," she said quietly, "did you just refuse emergency treatment to a child because of insurance concerns?" "I didn't refuse treatment," Webb replied, his confidence beginning to waver. "I made a medically sound recommendation for transfer to a facility better equipped to handle charity cases." The word charity was like a match thrown into gasoline. Hayes's composure cracked, and her voice rose to fill the entire emergency room. "Charity cases," she shouted. "You called a veteran's child a charity case." The room was dead silent. Even the background noise of the hospital seemed to stop. Hayes continued, her voice shaking with rage. "Dr. Harrison Webb, in 12 years as CEO of this hospital, I have never been more ashamed of anyone who has worked here. What you have done tonight is not just medically unconscionable, it's morally reprehensible." She turned to address the crowd that had gathered. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Patricia Hayes, CEO of City General Hospital. What you have witnessed tonight is not who we are. This man," she pointed directly at Webb, "does not represent our values, our mission, or our commitment to healing." She faced Webb again. "Dr. Harrison Webb, you are hereby terminated from City General Hospital, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. Your medical license review will begin first thing tomorrow morning, and I will personally ensure that your conduct tonight is reported to the State Medical Board." Hayes then knelt beside Maria and Sophie, her demeanor completely transformed. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I am so sorry for what you and Sophie have endured tonight. I want you to know that this hospital will provide whatever care Sophie needs, regardless of cost." She looked at Sophie, who was barely conscious, and her freebase and her voice softened even further. "Hi, Sophie. I'm Dr. Hayes. We're going to take very good care of you, okay?" Sophie managed a weak nod, and Hayes felt her heart break for this brave little girl. Hayes stood and began issuing orders with military precision. "Dr. Mitchell, prep the cardiac suite immediately. I want our best pediatric cardiac team assembled in 10 minutes. Nurse Carter, get Sophie to Trauma Bay 1 and start her on oxygen. And someone call Dr. Morrison. I don't care where she is or what she's doing. I want her here now." The emergency room transformed into a coordinated medical response. Sophie was whisked away to receive immediate care, with Maria following close behind. Hayes personally ensured that every resource the hospital had was dedicated to saving Sophie's life. As Dr. Webb was escorted out by security, patients in the waiting room actually applauded. Several people were still recording, and the videos would be uploaded to social media within minutes. The next 4 hours were the longest of Maria's life. Sophie underwent emergency cardiac catheterization, followed by surgical repair of her defective heart valve. Dr. Morrison, who had caught the first flight back from her conference, led the surgical team with Dr. Mitchell assisting. Hayes stayed with Maria throughout the entire procedure. She held Maria's hand during the worst moments, brought her coffee and food, and shared stories about her own daughter to help pass the time. "When my daughter was Sophie's age, she fell off her bike and broke her arm," Hayes said. "I was so scared, even though I knew it was just a broken bone. I can't imagine what you're going through." "Thank you," Maria replied, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how to repay you for this." "You already have," Hayes said firmly. 2 years ago, you saved a man's life in our lobby. You talked him down from suicide and probably prevented a tragedy. You've been a hero to this community, and now it's our turn to be heroes for you." The surgery was successful. Dr. Morrison emerged from the operating room with a smile on her face, and Maria collapsed with relief. "Sophie is going to be fine," Dr. Morrison announced. "We've repaired the valve defect, and her heart function is already improving. She'll need to stay in the hospital for a few days, but her prognosis is excellent." The story of what happened at City General Hospital that night spread like wildfire across social media. The videos of Dr. Webb's callous treatment of Maria and Sophie, contrasted with Dr. Hayes' compassionate response, were shared millions of times. The hashtag Sophie's story began trending on Twitter, with people sharing their own experiences of medical discrimination and calling for healthcare reform. Maria's story became a symbol of the challenges faced by veterans and their families, and the power of compassionate leadership. Dr. Webb's medical license was suspended in 3 states, and he was unable to find work in medicine anywhere in the country. The medical board cited his violation of the Hippocratic Oath and his failure to provide emergency care to a child in distress. Dr. Hayes used the attention to announce the establishment of the Sophie Rodriguez Fund, a permanent endowment that would ensure no veteran's child would ever be denied emergency care due to insurance concerns. The fund raised over $2 million in its first month, with donations coming from across the country. Sophie made a full recovery. She returned to school 6 weeks later, healthy and happy, with a new appreciation for the doctors and nurses who had saved her life. She often told her classmates that she wanted to be a doctor when she grew up, like the nice people who helped Mommy when she was scared. Maria and Dr. Hayes became close friends. Hayes often said that Maria had taught her the true meaning of courage, not just the courage to face physical danger, but the courage to fight for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible. The story sparked national conversation about healthcare access for veterans' families. Congress introduced the Veterans Family Care Act, which would guarantee comprehensive medical coverage for all children of disabled veterans. But perhaps the most important impact was on the culture at City General Hospital itself. The staff, inspired by Hayes' leadership and Maria's courage, recommitted themselves to the hospital's mission of compassionate care for all patients. Every year on the anniversary of Sophie's surgery, the hospital holds a celebration called Heroes Day, honoring both the medical professionals who save lives and the patients and families who show extraordinary courage in the face of adversity. This story reminds us that heroism comes in many forms. Maria Rodriguez was a hero on the battlefield, saving her fellow soldiers at great personal cost. But she was also a hero in that hospital corridor, fighting for her daughter with the same fierce determination she had shown in combat. Dr. Hayes was a hero for choosing compassion over profit, for recognizing that some things matter more than money. The medical team that saved Sophie's life were heroes for their skill and dedication. But the most important lesson of Sophie's story is this: we all have the power to be someone's hero. When we see injustice, when we witness cruelty, when someone needs an advocate, we can choose to act. In a world that often seems divided and cold, Sophie Rodriguez and her mother remind us that love is the strongest force on earth, and that when we stand together, we can overcome any obstacle. The next time you see someone being dismissed or treated unfairly, remember Sophie. Remember that behind every person struggling with the system is a story, a family, a life that matters. Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear hospital scrubs, sometimes military uniforms, and sometimes they're just a mom fighting for her child's life. What kind of hero will you choose to be? If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories that matter. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that compassion can change everything. In a world where you can be anything, choose to be someone's hero.